Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 89th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about how connecting with nature supports our mental health. And this is all because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, which runs from Monday the 10th to Sunday the 16th of May. And this year's theme is connecting with nature for your mental health and well-being. The Mental Health Foundation have chosen this theme to inspire more people to connect with nature in new ways, noticing the impact that this connection can have for their mental health. The other secondary thing is the positive impact connecting with nature has to convince decision makers at all levels that access to quality of nature is a mental health and social justice issue, as well as an environmental one. So during this week, the Mental Health Foundation are asking everyone to do three things. Firstly, experience nature, take time to recognize and grow your connection with nature during the week, and take a moment to notice and celebrate nature in your daily life. And I'm going to be talking about this more. To share nature, take a photo, video, or sound recording and share the connections you've made during the week to inspire others. Join the discussion on how you're connecting with nature by using the hashtags Connect with Nature and Mental Health Awareness Week. And finally, to talk about nature. So using the Mental Health Foundation's tips, and I've included their Thrive in Nature download and their research and any policy guides to discuss in your family, school, workplace, and community how you can encourage people to find new ways to connect with nature in your local environment, or even get a space set up that will benefit people. And I've included a link in the show notes if you want to have a look at that. So the reason I also wanted to make a podcast episode about this is I think it's fair to say that all of our mental health has experienced ups and downs over the last 14 plus months. Even if we have our routines and our usual go-to activities and we're really mindful about our mental health, it's been far from plain sailing. And then we can add to that the global challenges, politics, climate change, and it's been relentless. But I don't want to dwell on that because one comfort has been nature and connecting with any kind of open space. So when I say nature, I don't necessarily mean the wild outdoors. And if you have been able to do that, brilliant. But it could be your balcony. Maybe you've got some plants at home, your local park, a friend's garden, your garden, or nature at large. Several pieces of research have shown the benefit. In particular, a piece of research I read in the top scientific journal Nature entitled Spending at least 120 minutes a week in nature. And from this piece of research, and I've included a link in the show notes, they show that spending 120 minutes a week in nature is associated with good health and well-being. And another article in the New Scientist entitled Green Spaces Aren't Just for Nature, They Boost Our Mental Health Too, gives some context as to why this is the case. Urban living is actually a relatively new invention, if you like. The human species has existed for around 300,000 years, and interestingly, the oldest cities are only some 6,000 years old. So it's really quite recently, especially according to figures from the UN Population Division, that we've become a majority urban species. Now, the number of us living in cities is booming like never before around the world. And by 2050, it's thought that almost 70% of us will be urban dwellers. Although I will be interesting to see how that shifts in the UK, given that people have been moving away from cities, maybe to more countryside areas, maybe to be closer to families. And I also wanted to talk about psychologist Mark Burke-Berman at the University of Chicago and his colleagues in Toronto, Canada, found that by just adding 10 trees to a city block, this has a huge impact on people's perception of their health and well-being. And they've said this is equivalent to the effect of earning $10,000 more per household. So that is phenomenal, isn't it? And then there's ecotherapy, horticulture, or gardening therapy, which is a formal type of therapeutic treatment which involves doing outdoor activities in nature. And there isn't one single definition of ecotherapy, but it's definitely grown in popularity and discussion. But it's often used to describe a regular structured activity that is led by trained professionals. It could be horticulturists, it could be botanists, sometimes therapists who are there to support someone. It focuses on doing an activity outdoors rather than talking about illness and your health. It takes takes place in a green environment, and it's related to exploring and appreciating the natural world. And it also tends to involve spending time with other people, although you can interact at your own pace and maybe be in a particular corner of a garden that's quiet. There are normally some other people around if we think about an allotment or a vegetable patch. And this is shown to have such a positive effect on people's mental health and their confidence. So why should you care about connecting with nature? I mean, I am not the biggest outdoors person. I have to say, I am someone who loves concrete and coffee shops. But without my local park, I think my life would have been much, much, much more difficult. I also live close to a very big and beautiful cemetery, which might sound very strange, but it's almost like an arboretum. It has these enormous trees, very old trees. It's a very tranquil space. And as the seasons change, you can see the different flowers. So the snowdrops, then the primroses, then the bluebells, and it's such a joy to see that change, and the butterflies and the bees and the ladybirds. So why should we care? And I would say it can be a really proactive way to look after our mental health and well-being. That's not to say it deletes everything or our traumas. That's not to say that it's a fix for everything. But I think when we stop doing that and we stop connecting with nature, that's often the time that we notice that our mental health isn't as optimum as it could be. So why is this the case? I've pulled together articles and research, which you can also have a look because I've included links in the show notes, to just give an overview of why this might be the case. So firstly, it's that green is a really cool color that symbolizes nature and the natural world. And because of its strong associations with nature, green does represent tranquility, good luck, and health. And walking in that green and being around color is thought to be very uplifting for our mental well-being. Now, there are two schools of thought about color therapy. There isn't enough evidence or research, but I think we can all say when we enter an airport, for example, which is quite clinical, it's quite gray, they're bright lights, probably don't feel great. It's not necessarily the most uplifting experience. Whereas usually if we enter an area where there's a really beautiful garden or someone has some really lovely window boxes with brightly colored geraniums, we walk through a forest, or even when you're driving and you can often drive through a canopy of trees, it does lift us up. So I think that is one of the key things. Secondly, the calming nature sounds and even outdoor silence can lower blood pressure. It's quite a different silence from being in the house. And levels of our stress hormone cortisol, which is the body's fight or flight response, do lower. And this has been shown by research. I think it's key to switch off from the constant pinging, buzzing of notifications, which give us a bit of an adrenaline shock, actually, and distract us. And if you're walking along, absolutely, if it's an urban environment, you can hear birdsong, you can often hear blackbirds. You might live in an area where there's some skylarks, even though I know they're quite rare. If you take a twilight walk, sometimes the starlings, you can always hear. And even if you live in an urban area, maybe you have a small garden, you can sit there and have a listen. If you can put a bird feeder out, that's a very joyous thing. And I was very excited a couple of weeks ago to see a beautiful green finch flying around. And it's just that connection, isn't it? It's just seeing what's around us. It's being calmed by the birdsong and natural sound. And if we think how we are relatively new to urban environments, this makes complete sense. I think being part of something bigger, we're often so removed from nature, we don't see ourselves as part of this ecosystem, but it's crucial to acknowledge that and realize this bigger system and how we contribute to it and how it's also a part of us. So I think it can take us away from the day-to-day anxieties and the panic and feeling like we have no control to thinking I can look around me, I can be mindful, I can see what's going on around me and see that I'm part of this. And then the sunshine. Now, it hasn't been very sunny this year, has it? But the sunshine, being able to absorb Vit D, taking activity, even if it's a gentle stroll, maybe you want to run, maybe you want to run and walk, maybe you want to jog, whatever it is that you want to do to enable those deep breaths, the change of scene, and having that energizing experience. Again, it's just being away from your desk, it's being away from any work environment, and just having that time to recharge, doing something physical that helps with mindfulness. And of course, how could I talk about nature and not mention Shinrin Yuko, which originated in Japan, translates to as forest bathing. And this term was coined by the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries in 1982. And Japan's forest agency invested 4 million to study forest bathing and set up the International Society of Nature and Forest Medicine. So what is forest bathing? It is no more complicated than simply going for a walk in local woods or a park But rather than walking for exercise, you're taking the time to really focus on the natural world around you, from the rays of the sunshine to the leaves to the bird songs, to everything I've talked about, really. And some tips for you is that you might like to pick a quieter time of day where there are fewer people around, turning off your electrical devices. So thinking back to digital detox, really taking your time, looking at the leaves, looking at the bark. And a book that I've read over lockdown, which I really, really enjoyed, was The Secret Life of Trees. So you might like to read that. And now when I go for a walk, I'm always looking at the bark. I'm looking at the stories that the trees might have, and using all of your senses as well. So sight and sound and touch and smell, taste if you know what you're tasting. I'm not going to advocate that anyone eats the plants unless they absolutely know what they are, but it's all about that and paying attention to your breathing and relaxing. So it's more of an active mindfulness rather than a seated mindfulness. And it's thought that even if you have a busy schedule, then 10 minutes in nature can really help you to feel refreshed. Now, some of you might be listening to this and think, well, I can't connect with nature outside. I really do live in an urban environment. I can't really get outside my home very easily. I'm too busy. Well, I'm pleased to tell you there are absolutely things that you can do indoors. And 2 articles I came across last year at the beginning of lockdown that I've shared in the show notes. One is Mindfulness in Your Home by Karen Leibenguth, who runs Q's mindfulness courses. So that's Q Gardens. And she has a great website that you might want to check out. She does eco-coaching, coaching all around this area. And she, in this article, she talks about some really useful things that you can do, which is simply going to a window, maybe several times a day, taking 3 deep and conscious breaths, looking at the sky and really absorbing the formation of the clouds, different shades of blue, gray, whatever hues that you can see. If it's during sunset, you can meditate on that and just spend a quiet moment and take 3 more conscious breaths and notice how you're feeling. She also provides other tips in her articles about connecting to the elements and a nature connection exercise that's be really useful. So do check her out. I think her article was fantastic. And the other one was an article around finding a friend in nature at home and how when we can't get out and about, nature can still help us keep well. So this could be writing down good things in nature. So potentially if you decide to do that exercise of looking at the sky, writing down what you see, how that makes you grateful. The other thing you might like to do is, maybe you're artistic, is to draw something that nature represents and makes you feel positive about. You might want to use your phone and record some sounds that you can hear. Maybe it's a mix of urban sounds, but to create your own soundscape and write some reflection on how that makes you feel, but it's still connecting with the environment around you. And there's some really great audio. So they're audio nature meditations. If you have Spotify or BBC Sounds have some great slow radio tracks that you could listen to, sound of crunching leaves, and it's very relaxing and it just takes your mind away. And one of my favorites is there's a 2-hour piece on sounds of a rainforest. So there are lots of things you can do to connect and just give yourself some space. And also looking at photos of nature, whether that's online, in a magazine, in books, and let your imagination run free. Maybe you'd like to do some free writing and write a story. So if that's a struggle for you to get out, or if it's not possible, there are also ways that nature can support you indoors. I really hope you're enjoying this content. And if you are and want to keep up to date, then why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? The link's in the show notes, and you'll receive information about your mental health, well-being, and inclusion twice a month. So I really hope that this has been useful to you to help you think about not just the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week, but how nature can help you going forward with your mental health, whether it's taking photos, listening, having a sensory experience, thinking about how you want to connect with nature, doing your garden, having a window box, and it doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, you can normally send a message or put something on local groups and people will give you plants. Often people have cuttings. I've been doing that with some of my friends. And watching your plants nurture and grow can be so positive for our mental health. And as I've said, it doesn't mean that we are going to delete everything and all our mental ill health or our strife is going to go away. But if we think of ourselves as part of a bigger picture and part of the ecosystem, it's vital that nature is going to play a part in our recovery journey, but also being proactive about our mental health and well-being. So if you want to know more and about how my coaching can help you, do check out diverseminds.co.uk/solutions coaching. I also really urge you to have a look at the resources, Finding a Friend in Nature, Mindfulness in Your Home, the Kew Gardens blog, Nature article around why nature is so good for our mental health, the Mental Health Foundation's Thriving with Nature guide. I've also put in a link to forest bathing, 11 reasons why being in nature is relaxing, and green spaces aren't just for nature, they boost our mental health too. And that is the New Scientist article that I mentioned. So really, again, I really hope you connect. Please do tweet me or message me and let me know how you're connecting with nature this week. And I'll see you in the next episode where I'm going to be talking more about transitioning back and what that will look like for our well-being in the workplace. So stay safe, and until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.